I said, this is week 2 of our series entitled Reasons Not to Believe. We're going to talk about some of the most common objections into Christianity. And I was actually last Sunday after chapter 1, I was talking with Carissa, who's here. Hi. And she said it was so great to hear a pastor talk about the objections to Christianity, because sometimes it's almost like hidden ingredients. Some of the things that we don't like to talk about on Sunday mornings, like she said, it's just like, the food companies that don't want you to know what's in their food because they're afraid you might not buy it. Well, we are putting everything on the label these next few weeks so that you can see all the different things that come together to make the faith that I hold and that we hold together as a church. And some of those things are the dark sides of what's going on. And that's okay. There are things that Christians have done to help find their way through those weeds, and that's why I want to talk them through with you. And also, at any time, please give me a call, send me a message on Facebook or an email, and if these topics raise more questions for you than you get answers, which probably means I did my job, then I want to follow up and have a conversation with you. We can grab coffee, or we can just hang out somewhere and talk through some of those continuing questions that you might have. So today, we're going to talk about the theme, what about science? Science is this whole huge category that as Christians we need to hold up against our faith and say, how do these two things fit together? And I'll just tell you now that you shouldn't trust science. It's all a sham. The dinosaur bones, those are all made out of plaster and hidden, and it's a total scam. And the only science textbook you need is the Bible. That's right. What? That's not how it works? There are some points in time in some places in the world where that would be the whole conversation, and then it would be over. But we need to address science for what it is and not what it would be more convenient if it was. And honestly, I'm glad science is the force in our society that it is. Because we have things like medicine, which, like, 5 out of the 6 members of my family are on antibiotics right now. So I'm very thankful for medicine. And no, I didn't pull the penicillin off that moldy bread from last week. But some people look at science as something that stands in stark opposition to faith. They try and pit the two against each other, or even say, because we have all this scientific knowledge, we don't need faith anymore. And by looking in history, you can see how people have tried to pit sides against each other. So people will often talk about Galileo, who said the sun is at the center of our solar system, and not the earth. And you hear about all the trouble that he got into because of that claim. And it was from the church. So people say, see, churches are inherently anti-science. Or you could think about Charles Darwin and the origin of species and evolution and that whole thing, and that debate that still goes on. Not only the church's first strong initial reaction saying, hey, our Bible says the world came into being this way and you're saying this, so we need to pick a side. And that debate goes on and on, not only from that time but till now, as people figure out where they stand in terms of science in the classrooms and talking about the origins of life in schools. And where does faith end and science begin and things like that. But the thing that I want to suggest to you today, in a few different ways, is that science and faith don't need to be at odds. That they are both perfectly valid ways of knowing things. Real things, true things, but they're different ways of looking at the same reality. Because we only have one reality that we have access to. And faith and science are different ways of getting at that truth. And I'll talk about a few different examples of that. The main thing is, if you ever heard the saying, if your only tool is a hammer, then every problem starts to look like a nail. And so if your only tool to address problems in the world, or concerns, or questions, is science, well then every solution starts to look like a scientific one. But that won't get you too far, actually. I invited the band to play this song they just sang for you, The Scientist by Coldplay, because it gets at that truth in a really unique way. The second verse says, questions of science, science and progress, right? Do not speak as loud as my heart. That like all of the brain power that we as a humanity can muster will never drown out the sound of our own emotions and the things that happen in our internal world, which are true. Those are true things that happen inside of you. It's a real thing that science can't get its hands around. So science and faith talk about the same reality, but they come from different vantage points. They're different ways of knowing. And so we're going to look at how science and faith each handle one important question right now. And that question is, where do we come from? Like I already mentioned, that whole origin of life and how things came to be how they are is a huge category. One of the main points of contention between people of science and people of faith. So, different religions all give their story about how the world came to be as it is. And for Christians, we look at the Hebrew Bible and Genesis chapters 1 and 2 and the stories that they tell about how the world came to be. And from the very first moment that those words were put on paper and people began to read them, we've been trying to figure out what exactly those stories are getting at. They aren't as clear as some of the other much more obvious narratives, because the people in it are God and Adam and Eve, and no one got to do an after interview to clear up details. So, and then much later, Charles Darwin wrote The Origin of Species, that described the process of evolution where all life that is evolved from more basic species into something more complex and created the diversity of life over eons, right? Okay. So, Genesis and Darwin. These are the two stories that people try and they hold them up and say these two things can't possibly match. I want you to take time when you go home and look at Genesis again, and you'll notice something interesting. That Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 tell two different versions of the same story of creation. Like, the story actually plays out differently. And so it seems to me that Genesis is not nearly as concerned with the process, the step-by-step how things came to be, as it is with the characters in the story. Because that's consistent. Both chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis are concerned with the who of creation, God and humanity. And less so with the how. Genesis is very clear that God is the one who started this whole world spinning, and that God put humanity on earth for a reason, to be in relationship with one another and with our Creator. So we have a reason to be here. And I'll leave it to you to decide how you work out the evolution thing. What I'm saying is that that is not the thrust of the Genesis story. The thrust of the Genesis story is the who. Who we are, who God is, and how we connect. But that actually gets to another question that everybody asks. People ask, how do we get here? And people also ask, why am I here? And when we ask, I that question, why am I here? Science has an answer for that. Science's answer to the question, why am I here, is to pass on your DNA, to continue the species so that it can evolve and become more populous, so that your genes can be passed on. That's the reason why you're here. But when I ask that question to myself, and I would suppose when you ask that question of yourself, that's not what you're shooting for. That's not the answer you're looking for. When you're asking questions of meaning, science generally falls short. We're looking for, science gives us a functional answer to the question. What we're looking for is something much more existential. Here's an example. So my first time on a roller coaster did not go well. I think I was 10 or 11, and it was on the high roller at Valley Fair, which was just as terrifying then as it is now. Not terrifying in the oh, this is going to be the thrill of a life. It's this might kill me sort of thrill, right? And so it's rocking around, and I had, as per instructions, I had taken my glasses off. I was holding them on my lap, and then they fell off my lap, and they were rattling around the bottom. So I was just riding like this thing. Why am I on this roller coaster? Why am I here? And it's that kind of why am I here that we ask about our own lives, sometimes in moments of crisis just like that. Why am I here? What is going on with this whole crazy ride that is my life? And that's not a question about DNA or about your species. It's a question about existence and about meaning. What does life mean? And when we get to that point, questions of meaning, science is at a total loss. Science can give us all of the hows that we want, but it can never give us a why. But science still demands evidence for anyone who makes a claim. And so there are folks who hold so tightly to science and evidence that they say, you must provide evidence for this thing you call faith. And then we're at a loss, because we don't have empirical evidence for the things that form our faith in God, in Christ, in the Bible. None of us were there when the events of the Bible took place. We can't verify God's existence with a lab experiment. We can't measure God's forgiveness on a scale. And so we look foolish in a world that demands evidence. And that brings me back to the words that were read just a little while ago from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, where it says, this is NIV, a different translation. It says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God." The message of the cross is foolishness. So what is it about the message of the cross that's foolish? That's a really important question to ask ourselves. Why is the cross, this thing that Christians wear proudly around their necks and mount on the tops of their buildings, why are we announcing our foolishness to the world? Here's what I want to share about the message of the cross today, and that could be an infinite series about what exactly happens in the cross. But what I want to share with you today is the message of the cross is that sacrifice has meaning, that death has meaning, that love is more than a chemical reaction in your brain, that love is actually at the center of existence. These are the things that I see when I look at the cross. The place where God gave everything because of God's love for us. And from a scientific point of view, we'd say, well, that's absurd. Show me the evidence. But to point fingers at those claims about the cross is, again, to ask the wrong kind of question. It's to start from the wrong kind of knowing. Because those categories don't fit in science's ability to question. You can't put matters of the heart under a microscope. You can't put the soul in a test tube. So, if you only have one way of understanding the world, through science, then your range of vision will always be too small to handle those big questions. Again, if all you have is a hammer, it turns all your problems into nails. The cross has always sounded foolish. This wasn't written in a modern era. When Paul wrote this letter to the Corinthians, it wasn't written in a time that had science. There were other people who were already saying that the cross is foolish. So it's just timeless truth. The cross will seem foolish. That's something that we have to accept and embrace and understand as followers of the cross, followers of Jesus. The thing is that people want to appear wise in the standards of the world where they live. And so, if living means looking good to you, or if living means working hard to you, or if living means having money, if living means being intelligent, then life doesn't mean anything. Because for meaning to be real, for it to be lasting and truly true, it has to last forever. It has to outlast you. Your meaning has to be bigger than you. Otherwise, your life is just a 3-minute roller coaster ride, and then a whimper, and it's over. And even if life means family to you, a really good thing, family's a great thing. Or if living means being a good person, or if living means finding someone to love, that meaning still dies with you. It's something less real, less significant than what it could be. Real meaning lasts. So, science is this amazing, powerful tool that we can use to understand the world that we're in. But it's only one way of knowing. It's only one tool. And there's this whole other realm that we can experience and that we can say with confidence, I know that there is a God who loves me, in spite of the lack of empirical evidence. Science is a wonderful thing, but it only suggests the how of creation and not the who. Science suggests the means of the universe, but not its meaning. And so if your life lacks meaning, take a step toward the foolishness of the cross today. That's my invitation to you. To embrace that. And if you're the kind of person who needs evidence, just look around. Have one conversation with one other person in this room, and you'll start to put the pieces together. And no, it's not a proof that you can do the math and it all adds up. It's proof in a way that is deeper and more meaningful than you can imagine, because it is eternal. And if you're the kind of person who likes to do experiments, I've got one for you. All right? So if you're looking for meaning, here's an experiment for you to try. Even if you aren't a person of faith, act like a Christian for the next 3 weeks. See what happens. All right, so that's things like praying and reading your Bible daily, coming to worship at a church, doesn't have to be this one, and and handling things in your day-to-day life with the kind of integrity that one would expect from a person who's a follower of Jesus. On the Northern Light Church Facebook page this afternoon, I will post specific steps and give you some tools so that you can have ideas. If you are a person of faith and you don't feel like you've been acting particularly like a Christian lately, you can do this too, by God. Because we all need the kind of evidence that will come from that. So the proof of God's love is as close as the clothes on your back. It's the God who wants to live within you, breathe his life into you, so that you can have real and lasting life. The only evidence you'll need is right before your eyes when you step into the world of faith. Pray with me. God, we come to you today as people in a skeptical time that asks more questions than we have answers for. But here we are, speaking to the air in expectation that something will happen. And the reason that we do this together is the evidence of your love that has arisen again and again and again. And so we ask this morning that you would help us to find you. Help us to have a eureka moment with the grand discovery of your love, your everlasting life, and the beauty that you infuse into every moment of our mundane existence and turn it into something grand. In Jesus' name, amen.